Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this lunchtime webinar on helpful hints for the CPD scheme run by the CPD team here at the General Optical Council. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Natalie Michaud. I'm the CPD review project lead here at the General Optical Council. And here today with me, I'll be assisted by my colleague, CPD operations manager, Joy Bolt, and a colleague, Vikram Saklani, behind the scenes from our communications team. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. I'm really glad to have you here. Next slide, please. So just a quick run through of the agenda for today. It is a short webinar to give you time to have your lunches and what have you. Just a short welcome and introductions as I've done at the start. Then we're moving on to an overview of the CPD scheme, why we introduced it, what the main changes are, before we move to an update on MyCPD features. So MyCPD being the logging platform, if you haven't used it already. Then we'll talk a bit about completing, updating, and uploading your personal development plan. So that's your PDP, and the things that you might need to consider when you are drafting that and putting it on the system. And finally, we'll be giving some answers to some frequently asked questions that we've had into the team recently. If you have any questions at all that aren't answered by this webinar, do have a look at our previous webinars and the guidance that we've provided on our website. If you're still a bit stumped, feel free to pop a question in the Q&A function on this webinar, which will be running. We won't be able to answer any questions live, unfortunately, due to time constraints, but we will get back to you outside the webinar. We have your contact details from the sign-up sheet, so don't worry about that. Feel free to ask any questions of yours that remain unanswered. Next slide, please, Vikram. And just to note that the webinar will be available for anyone who misses any part of it or has to drop out early or anything like that. It will be available to watch again as a video on our website via our YouTube channel. So please do check back in a couple of days if you want to either watch it again or share it with others. As I said, any questions that aren't answered, pop them in the Q&A, or if you're not comfortable doing that, and you should know if you pop a question in the Q&A, no one else can see it, just us. So it's not a public question, but you can ask us questions to the CPD team inbox, which is on your screen now, cpd@optical.org. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of a summary of the main changes from CET to CPD, we've got a short animation to show you. So can we press play on that, please? CET will become CPD from the 1st of January 2022. CPD stands for Continuing Professional Development and is designed to help you build upon your existing skills and develop new ones. Here are the main things that you need to know about CPD. CPD will run in 3-year cycles, and you will need to obtain the same number of points as you did under CET. So 36 points for optometrists, dispensing opticians, and those with contact lens specialty, and 54 points for specialty prescribing optometrists. You will obtain your points across 4 core domains: professionalism, communication, clinical skills, and leadership and accountability. If you hold specialty registration, you will also need to get points from a 5th specialty domain. You can now count relevant learning from other sources towards your CPD points total. All registrants will need to undertake 1 peer review per cycle, including dispensing opticians. All registrants will also need to complete a reflective exercise once per cycle, looking back at their learning and development throughout that cycle. You will be responsible for logging details of your CPD on your MyCPD account. Doing this is simple, and you can look up details of CPD you attended to make it even easier. More information about CPD and what you'll need to do to meet our requirements is in our guide for registrants, which you can find on our website. Thank you. So that was just a summary of the main changes from CET to CPD. There is a lot more information about the details, the more granular details of the changes that we've made in our guide for registrants, which, as the animation says, you can find on our website. And I would encourage anyone attending to have a look at that and make sure that they're confident in the expectations that they will need to meet. A question that we get asked quite often is, why introduce CPD? Why make the change from CET to CPD? And the short answer is to provide solutions to criticisms of the previous CET scheme. So we'd been told by registrants themselves, as well as other stakeholders, that CET is not always, or was not always, relevant to their interests, their professional interests, or their scope of practice. And that seemed to be particularly the case, and we were getting more and more feedback about that as scopes of practice diversified. So we tried to solve that problem by requiring fewer mandatory domains. As you'll be aware, under CET, there were quite a few mandatory competencies that everybody had to tick off. Now we only have the 4 core domains. And as long as you get 1 point in each of those domains and spread your learning across as you see fit, that's the mandatory requirement there. So we have opened it up in that way. Another criticism that we'd received of CET was that it didn't allow for example, interprofessional learning to be counted towards someone's points total. So if they worked in a hospital clinic or in an environment with lots of other healthcare professionals, they would find value in going to CPD sessions run by them or other learning events, but they wouldn't be able to get points for it. And to solve that problem, we've introduced self-directed CPD. So self-directed CPD is there to cover anything that's not delivered by a GOC-approved provider. So that might include, for example, independent study, learning, supervision of students, CPD run by other healthcare professionals or other organisations, that kind of thing. So anything that is relevant to your professional practice that falls outside the scope of traditional CPD. And finally, another criticism that we had of the CET scheme was that it was seen as a bit of a tick box exercise, and that it just encouraged maintenance of existing skills, keeping those existing skills up to date rather than encouraging professionals to learn new ones. And to solve that, we've introduced a change in the underpinning of the scheme. So CET was underpinned by those undergraduate competencies, the requirements that we would expect somebody to be able to meet and continue to meet at the end of their degree course. We've changed it now to the standards of practice, which, whilst still a baseline of expectations, they are a baseline of expectations for registrants throughout their career, not just at the start of it. And what we're expecting is that will encourage more registrants to look across, look broader at their learning and take up more opportunities to develop new skills, as well as maintaining those all-important existing ones. So next slide, please. CPD so far is going quite well, and that's all thanks to you guys, the registrants, for embracing it so enthusiastically. As of the 22nd of March of this year, we had 23,714 total points logged, most of those being provider-led points, but a considerable minority of self-directed points logged as well. And this really is a big well done to registrants. This is fantastic for so early in the new cycle. Really encouraging to see that registrants are engaging with CPD and proactively logging the points. And obviously that is quite a considerable change for registrants as well. The responsibility is now on you as the registrant to log your own CPD points rather than accepting those that providers upload for you. Next slide, please. So I thought what we would talk about now is a few of the MyCPD features. This will be particularly helpful for those of you who haven't used the system as of yet, who haven't logged on, but also give a bit of clarity, hopefully, for those of you that have logged on, but could do with a few reminders or shortcuts and things like that. So when you first log into MyCPD, you will see 4 tiles, a plan tile, a record tile, a reflect tile, and a search tile. Now, it's important to state that this is what you will see when you log into MyCPD after you've completed the personal development plan, the PDP, and I'll come to that a bit later. But for now, next slide, please. The CPD statement page, which you can find by clicking on, if you can just go back a second to the previous slide. If you click on the record button there, you will be able to get to your CPD statement. So if we can just move back forwards again, the CPD statement is where you see your CPD requirements. So the specific requirements that apply to you dependent on your registrant category. So this is a dispensing opticians account. So you can see the requirements for this particular dispensing optician here on the statement, and you'll be able to see your progress against those requirements as well. Obviously, the dials will look somewhat different if you are a registrant with specialty registration, so a contact lens optician or a independent prescribing optometrist, or if you're an optometrist, it might look slightly different as well. But the requirements are all there and you can see your progress against them. Do note as well that for dispensing opticians, peer review is now mandatory. This is in response to registrant feedback that we had. Over 75% of our dispensing optician registrants were doing peer review voluntarily anyway. And our view is registrants should appropriately get credit for that. Next slide, please. So if we take a look at the fourth tile in relation to CPD search, so hopefully we can answer a few questions there about searching for CPD. Please note that this is not where you search for CPD points to add to your account, which is done via record. So if you want to look up details of CPD that you have already completed, you do that via the record tab. The search tab is to look at CPD that you might want to attend that you have not already attended. If you can just move on there, please. Brilliant. So if you want to search for CPD, always the best thing to do is to search by the details that you have available. If you have specific details of a piece of CPD, pop those in the search box. Otherwise, you could enter a keyword, something like that, related to your interests or what you're looking for. If you are, for example, missing points in a particular domain, you can filter the CPD that appears by domain, by location, and by format as well. So some registrants will prefer, for example, remote delivered webinars, that kind of CPD. Some might prefer in person, and you can choose your preferred format in there as well as date. So make sure that you can actually attend, you are actually free to attend the CPD that you like the sound of. So you can search by all those in there. If it's not generating many results, you may have been a little too specific in your requirements. So if you can be more flexible and just filter by one or two different parameters rather than all of them, that will help you to identify some CPD that's appropriate for you. So next slide, please. So this is the CPD support page. This is a good way to access lots of supporting information at a glance rather than having to go through the GOC website. And you can access this page in the top right-hand corner of your screen when you are logged into MyCPD. On this page, you've got links to the CPD guide for registrants that I mentioned earlier, which sets out detail of the requirements on registrants for undertaking CPD, no matter what category of registrant you are. You can also access the standards of practice, and the standards of practice being the baseline standards of professionalism, conduct and competence that every registrant is expected to adhere to, and the new underpinning for the CET scheme. So if you're not sure what's in those standards, it's a good time to have a refresher, and you can access those via that link as well. You can also access the CPD rules. So they are the laws, the legislation that sits behind the CPD scheme and gives it its statutory backing. It is very legal language, so don't expect it to be easily digestible. But if you are interested in that particular area and how requirements are set out in law. You can see that there. You can also see what requirements are on CPD providers by way of statute there as well. There's also a bit of guidance on filling in the personal development plan. Hopefully you won't need to delve too deeply into that after I've gone through filling in your PDP, but if you do have any other questions, you may find that it's answered by that guidance and template. We do also have a reflection statement template that you can download from there as well, to give you a few prompts as to what you might be considering when filling in a reflection statement. There's also guidance for both registrants and providers of CPD on CPD formats, as well as self-directed CPD formats. So if you undertake some independent study, for example, but you're not sure how you ought to classify that when you're logging it on your account, you'll find that in the self-directed CPD formats guidance, and that's at the bottom of that page. Can we move on to the next slide, please? I think we're going to look at adding a CPD point there. So when you seek to add a CPD point, this is the screen that you will see. Add points from, you've got the two options, add points from provider-led CPD and add points from self-directed CPD. Please double check which type of CPD you are trying to log. If it is run by a GOC approved provider, it is provider-led, no matter what the format is. It will be provider-led. Make sure you do log it as provider-led, because if you don't, you may not get the points or may not be able to allocate the CPD points that you rightly have achieved and deserve, because self-directed CPD is worth fewer points generally than provider-led CPD is. So do make sure that you pick the right option. If you don't select the right option, you do have the chance to delete an entry of CPD and add it again as the correct categorization. So always add points from approved providers as provider-led, never self-directed. Even if you think that it perhaps wasn't targeted at you, that doesn't matter. If it was targeted at any GOC registrant and it's run by a GOC approved provider, it is provider-led. So let's imagine we click on one of these. Next slide, please. We click on add provider-led. So first step is to find the CPD that you have undertaken. And the way to find this, the best way to find the CPD that you've undertaken is to use the 6-digit CPD reference number. Now, most providers will give that to you as part of the information that they give you when you've completed the piece of CPD. They may give you their internal reference number. So do check that it is the 6-digit CPD reference number. You should always find the piece of CPD if you search by that C reference number. If you can't find it for whatever reason, try searching by title or by provider. It may be that there's been some kind of error in providing you with that number. We get a lot of registrants that are searching by reference number, title, and provider, perhaps all at the same time. All it takes is for a slight error in any of those boxes for the system not to be able to find the CPD. So reduce the number of search categories that you use, and you might find it if you've struggled to find it before. Keep the other boxes blank if you've got that reference number, and just go for the reference number. Note that the C reference may bring up multiple results, and that might be because it's a piece of CPD, for example, that's running more than once, running multiple times. So if you've got a webinar, for example, like this one that's running on a number of occasions, then make sure that you select the correct occasion that you actually attended when you are adding it to your account. Next slide, please. A really important part for both you and us, but particularly for the providers as well, is for you to give feedback on the CPD that you attend. Providing feedback allows us to be able to quality assure what providers are delivering and make sure that the learning, they are meeting the standards that we expect, and that the learning is suitable, meets your requirements, and is appropriately challenging. You do need to give feedback for all provider-led CPD that you complete. At the minute, we're asking for comments and rating, but a new rating system will be coming soon, which will simplify things for you and make it a bit quicker to provide meaningful feedback. And as I said, it allows the provider to reflect on what learning they're delivering, but also has an important function for us to make sure we can make sure that the providers that are registered with us are doing their jobs properly. So next slide, please. So now to talk about completing, updating and uploading your personal development plan, the PDP. This is the first thing that you will be asked to do when you log in for the first time. So when you log into MyCPD for the first time, you will be asked a number of what we call scope of practice questions. So these questions, you'll probably be able to see those on the screen. They're set out in the personal development plan template there. So the questions will ask you what settings you spend most of your time in, whether you undertake any enhanced areas of practice and what they are, what your professional interests or opportunities are, and what you think will be different about your work in 3 years' time. So questions to really get an idea of what you're interested in, what your kind of career trajectory is, and what it is that you want to learn and develop in. Answer those questions on your first login. It shouldn't take you too long, and you should be able to answer those fairly easily. What we also ask you to do is to read the PDP guidance and confirm that you've read that guidance on your first login. Do take the time to do that, because you'll only be asked to do it again if you need to log in again. So do take the time to do that, and check off the guidance as read when you've done so. That's simple enough. Within 3 months of your having logged in for the first time and confirmed that you've read that guidance, we'll expect you to have completed and uploaded your personal development plan. So you've got 3 months to do it. You can undertake CPD in the meantime, before you upload your PDP. The only trouble is that you won't be able to log it on your account until you've uploaded that PDP. So if you are going to undertake CPD before you do your PDP, make sure you keep really, really good and clear notes offline to upload when that does become available. So if we just move to the next slide, please. So far, actually, quite a few registrants, 25% have logged a PDP, which is really good for this stage in the cycle and reflects that lots of registrants have logged in early on in the cycle and completed that PDP. So as I said, complete it within 3 months of your first login, within 3 months of ticking the box to say that you've read the guidance and having read it, obviously. You can, and we would encourage you to revisit and revise both the PDP and scope of practice questions throughout the 3-year cycle if your career goals change, if your scope of practice changes, if there are any other changes to your professional life that mean that you would undertake learning slightly differently. And you are able to revisit that and upload as many or as few PDPs as you would like. If your scope of practice changes wildly, you might find that what you want and need to learn also changes dramatically as well. And you can reflect that in your PDP and re-upload it. Why is the PDP so important, and why is it important to spend time on getting it right? We've given you a 3-month window in which to upload it, because we do recognize that, consideration should go into the drafting of your PDP. And we really want it to be meaningful for you so that it reflects what it is that you want to learn, what it is that you need to learn, what are your strengths and weaknesses, and what it is that you want to get out of this particular CPD cycle. And it should be meaningful, it should be detailed, because it will form part of the mandatory reflective exercise to be completed in the last 6 months of the cycle. And a good PDP will do half the work for you in terms of undertaking that reflective exercise. What we'll be asking you to do as part of the reflective exercise is look back at your learning and development across the cycle, see how things have gone, think about what could go better next time and how you could shape that. Next slide, please. So I should say from the start that this is the personal development plan, the PDP template that we provide. You don't have to use this template. So if you have a document that you have filled in or you use with your employer, or as part of your specific NHS trust that you work in, or via your LOC or anything like that, that covers this kind of material, so your learning goals for the next couple of years, you can upload that instead. So you can upload that as a PDP, any document that contains effectively this type of information. You don't have to use our template, but you may want to if you don't have another version available. So the template itself sets out 6 particular areas that you need to fill in. The learning outcome. So what is the learning outcome to be achieved? That might be something quite simple as improving your knowledge in a particular practice area. So let's say improving your knowledge in glaucoma, for example. A date for completion. So a date for completion is really important because it enables you to be able to plan your learning a bit more effectively. So choose a date for completion. It might be that you want to do it in the next 6 months because your workplace is going to require you to do that within the next 6 months. Or it might be that you want to tick off a few prerequisite courses before you do some enhanced learning, something like that. But either way, if you set a date for completion, we're not going to hold you to account for any of this, by the way. If you end up not completing any of the learning outcomes in your PDP, that might be completely understandable. It's just that when it comes around to the reflective exercise, make sure you think about why that is, and say clearly why that has happened. We understand that life changes, that life sometimes gets in the way, and you end up doing completely different CPD to what you'd intended to do at the start of the cycle. But as long as you think about what that is and why that is, it's not a problem at all. The next question that we ask is, oh, sorry, Vikram, if you can go back. The next question that we ask here is, how does this relate to my scope of practice? So how does the learning outcome relate to your scope of practice? How does it support your knowledge and skills for your current or aspirational scope of practice? So that might be, for the example I gave, you setting out why you need to improve in glaucoma or why you want to improve your skills in glaucoma, and what you think that will enable you to do in future. How will you achieve that? Will you go to some webinars? Will you go to some workshops? Will you work with colleagues to share information? Will you shadow a specialist? What CPD activities will you undertake to achieve that learning outcome? Why is that learning outcome important? Now, this is more of a reflective column, I suppose. So what specific things led you to identify that learning outcome is necessary? It might have been something that came up in an appraisal. It might have been some feedback that you had from a patient. It might have been an understanding that you would improve this skill if you were taken on in a particular role, for example. There could be many reasons as to how you got to identify in that specific learning outcome. Document them all in there. And then, how will I know when this has been achieved? How will you measure that achievement? Will you be satisfied that you have improved that skill when you've attended the requisite amount of webinars, that kind of thing? And there's a final column on how has this impacted my practice. Obviously, you won't be able to fill that in until such time as you've met the learning outcome, but come back to that later on in the cycle and fill that in. Next slide, please. So now just to answer a couple of the FAQs that we've had coming into the CPD inbox. We have had a lot of questions, and I can see that we're getting a lot of questions throughout this webinar. Rest assured, we will come back to you with answers on those. But for now, we'll focus on some of the more common ones that have been coming into the inbox. The first question being, I couldn't find the provider-led CPD I have completed to upload to my account. What should I do? Joy, are you able to give us an answer to this?
Yes, I'm quite happy to do. I think you might have touched on it slightly earlier. Basically, the best thing to do is to use the C reference number. It's got 6 digits. Use that. That will definitely bring up event that you've attended. If not, try to put in the title that the provider has given you. Please ensure that you're not using their internal reference, because we don't keep a note of that. We can't search on that. And make sure that you're spelling everything correctly, because one little thing will off-put the results. But my first and forward, I would always use the C reference number.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joy. That's really helpful. Next slide, please. So this question is, can I upload provider-led CPD before I have received evidence from the provider? You can, but I wouldn't if I were you. Certainly because you might not remember to upload that evidence. And then if your account is looked at by the GOC as part of our kind of annual review of records, and let me just state here and now, that's not a punitive review of records. We look at it to provide support and encouragement if you need more help in deciding what you need to log and how you need to log it. So it is very much a supportive process, and we will get in touch with you well in advance of that being undertaken. If your account has been selected randomly, it is absolutely nothing to worry about if you've been answering honestly. But yeah, so you can upload provider-led CPD before you've received evidence from the provider, but it doesn't make much sense to do that just in case you forget to add the evidence afterwards. So I would wait until such time as you've received that evidence. Providers should be supplying that to you within 10 days of the CPD being held. If they haven't done that, do chase them. So next slide, please. What counts as evidence for self-directed CPD? So this is a really good question, and one that we've been receiving an awful lot. What counts as evidence is anything that demonstrates that you have engaged with the material. So for example, if you've read an article in a magazine and you've thought about that and reflected on it, a picture of the article isn't enough, because that doesn't show us that you've read it. What does show us that you've read it is perhaps the notes that you've taken next to that article, or the reflections that you've had after you've read that article. Anything that demonstrates that you've engaged with whatever material it is that you've used for learning, it counts as evidence. And if your account is reviewed and the evidence is reviewed, we are not going to criticize you if you have uploaded evidence honestly. Where we will be pulling people up is if the evidence doesn't match, for example, the CPD that's been undertaken at all. That's the kind of thing we'll be asking a few more questions about. But yeah, essentially anything that shows that you have engaged with it. Notes, reflections, recordings of your thoughts, even anything like that would count as evidence for self-directed CPD. So the next slide, please. I think this is the last of the FAQs for today. I've uploaded provider-led CPD as self-directed in error. Easily done. What should I do? Joy, can you give us an answer to this as well, please?
Yeah, of course. If you feel that you've uploaded your points incorrectly and it should be provider-led, what I would advise is to make a copy of your reflection statement first and then delete the event and reload it as provider-led. If you delete it and at first, you won't be able to get back that copy of your reflection statement. So I would always make sure that I have a copy of the reflection statement first, but it's quite easy to do. There's a big delete button there. You can't miss it.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Joy. Thank you all for attending and for the questions that you have submitted during the Q&A. I can see quite a few under there. We will get back to you on those. Like I say, we've got your contact details. A lot of the questions that I can see popping up are answered either earlier on in the webinar for those of you that have joined later, or in our previous webinars or guidance. So do have a look at those, but regardless of whether you find the answer in those or not, we will get back to you. All that remains to be said, if you can just move to the final slide, Vikram, is thank you very much for listening and attending. Have you got any questions that haven't been answered by the webinar or any of our guidance documents or anything like that? Get in touch with the team. Thank you very much for your rapt attention. We will be hosting more webinars, and do remember that if you missed this or any part of this, you will be able to watch it on our CPD YouTube channel later on, or on our website. And yeah, we hope to see you at one of those future events as well. And please do have a great day. Thanks very much for coming, and take care.